Masechet Zevahim Daf Samach Tet Amud Aleph. Two lines from the bottom. Mishnah. Malak v'nim set terefav zakoin de milika on the bird. And he found out it was a terefav, which means it had a fatal defect and therefore would be pasul. Rabbi Meir went to Mebet Aviyah. The Meir says even that's the case, it still does not make you tameh if you eat it. Rabbi Meir says that's. Oh, Rabbi Meir Kal v'chomer. Rabbi says, you know why I know it doesn't? Because of a Kal v'chomer. Im devlat behema shnei mitva b'masa. In the case of an dead animal, which usually transmits tumah. Tuma can be transferred through touching or carrying it. Still, if you slaughter it, there's no tuma anymore, even if it's terefa. But a bird which does not transfer only through eating, so for sure, Baba Chama would tell me that there's no tuma for if you did milika. God says, "Mama sim shato shehim meshato la'achel muteret." It's the same thing we can find by the case of a bird shechita, that even though it allows you to eat it, it also takes away the tumah. So to milika, you do to the bird inside of the midash, so how you slaughter it, that also allows it not to have tameh, and even if it's terefa. The Gemara says, one second. You want to compare it from a dead animal? You have to compare it to a dead animal. And therefore, only shechita takes off tuma, but not milika, and therefore milika for a terefa bird would not work. One second. We have a very big famous concept in Shas called dayo. Dayo means you're making a kavachomer. You have to use the existing framework of the kavachomer. So Yosef basically is telling Rameir, you can't say what you said that milika would count off to take off the tuma because shechita it's not shechita and shechita doesn't. So the Gemara says, one second, Rameir, how do you not hold that? How do you still go with the kavachomer? Gemara says, and we can prove it. But how the other thing we even know that the word dayo, the concept of dayo, which means you can't use a kavachomer to teach you extra stuff, is from the Torah. How the time it says, "Midin kavachomer kezak." Mahachal kavachomer, and we see it. Pasuk says, "V'yomer Hashem Moshe va'avia yarok b'fanei." When Miriam was punished by Hashem, Hashem said that she should sit 14 days in solitude. Why? Because he said, "Kavach chomer min l'shechina arba'a asar yom." He said, if a father were to spit in his daughter's face, out of embarrassment, she would hide for 7 days. So therefore, Kavach chomer, God, it should at least be isolated. Miriam should be isolated for 14 days, double amount. However, Hashem didn't say she has to do 14 days. He only has to do 7. She only has to do 7 because what he said, God, quote unquote, brought up Kal V'chomer from a father, and the father will only be 7 days. So too is also 7 days. So we see the concept of dayo. So how did Rameir go around that? The Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Avin. Yosef said in the name of Ravin, Rabbi Meir, Kira Ashkach B'darash. Rabbi Meir found a pasuk and he says as follows: Zot Torat HaBehema VeHa'of. This is the halacha for the animal and the bird, teaching you that they have equal halachot. What kind of, in regards to which halachot are birds and animals have same halachot? Because why? You would think it doesn't, because animal is tameh by touching, and birds only if you eat it. When you eat a bird, tameh, your clothing becomes tameh, animal does not. Now this must be telling you, just like in the case of an animal, which when you eat it, when you the whatever you do to eat it, yani melika or shechita, depending where it is, it takes out the tuma. To the bird, same thing. Sorry. So in the case of an animal or shechita takes out the terefa tuma, so to a bird, whatever you're using to kill it, whether it's shechita, asabim, terefa, or milika inside, there's no tuma if it's terefa. Very vida my time. So how can we distinguish that? Karash, he also found a pasuk and says nevela terefa. When it mentions dead birds, it mentions nevela and terefa. Marvi David says terefa lama nemra. How come we have to mention terefa? If you mention nevela, why mention terefa? Im terefa haya, because if the terefa could have lived without dying, then there'd be no tuma till it actually dies. Are they nevela amra? Therefore, technically, it's just a nevela. So it's a case of a dead animal. If it cannot live, يعني it would have died. So for sure, it's also considered a nivla even while it's alive. I was teaching you that the word terefa teaches you that the word that the terefa, that if you slaughtered it, it still has tuma if you eat the bird. Or I said, المعضلة بشتي لما عطت تكتيف بحلب نيفيلا بحلب ترفع. So what? You're using that same logic. And when the pasuk says the حلب بنيفيلا, the Isur fast the nivela, Isur fast the terefa, حتى نعمل nema. Does that also mean that if it died that shahita, that it's the same thing? Isn't that also extra? Im terefa haya. So what if the terefa can live? Do we know tomorrow if it dies? How did nivela? But that's the case of the nivela. Im terefa haya in if the terefa would have died, how did he become also be considered nivela? Telephone was telling you that if the birds tended if it was slaughtered, شحبات هور maybe the head would mutar. ميخاد هي متمأة, but that sounds like the animal itself would be tameh. Impossible. You can have the animal tameh, but the fats would be tahor. وأما رفيد مرав وعمري لا بمتيزنا وخي يموت منها بما, when it says there to be a death in from the animal. Mektzat behema metamah sounds like even partial of the animal makes tameh. Mektzat behema enam tameh. It's like part of the animal does not make it tameh. Ve'ezu, what's that? Zu terefa shachar is case of a terefa that was slaughtered. That a terefa animal that is slaughtered does not become tameh. So that's how Yubida explains the word terefa. El terefa. So that can be talking about chilib at least. So that's how Yubida must use the word Yubida for something else. It's coming to exclude the chilib of a non-kosher animal. That chilib is tameh. That teaches you that in the case of a chilib of an animal, where there's a constant terefa, which is kosher animals, excludes the non-kosher animal because there is no terefa. Terefa means you slaughtered the animal, you found a fatal defect. So therefore it makes it not kosher. But if it's a non-kosher bird, non-kosher animal in the first place, there's no such constant terefa. Over here as well, regarding our birds, the word terefa is excluding non-kosher birds. There's no such concept of terefa, and therefore there's no tuma if you eat it, even though it's asur. So, Rabbi Didag's great explanation of the word terefa, not extra. Where it says, of tamele Rabbi Yehuda min lebanaf, no, really, the non-kosher bird, the no tuma, if you eat it, is learned from the word nevela. The Tana says, Rabbi Yehuda says, you would have thought that the dead body of a non-kosher bird makes clothing tameh by eating it. Talmud for the pasuk says, "Nevela utrefa lo yachal." You should not eat a nevela or terefa. Mishi isura mishum batochal nevela only applies to an animal that you're not allowed to eat a nevela. Yes, as any isura mishum batochal nevela, but non-kosher bird animal, non-kosher bird doesn't have that isur to don't eat the nevela only. Mishum batochal nevela because that's you have a general isur of not eating the bird at all. Whereas hanami tepukle mi behalad nevela. That halacha you can learn from the part of the halal that we said earlier. Since it says you can't eat it for the chel benevila, teaches you mishu isra mishum batuchal b'chel benevila. Esazu she'enu isra mishum batuchal chel benevila ela mishum tameh. So again, using that same framework, this by the case of a halal, you would apply the same logic and say that you don't need to teach me that the halal is asur because I'm not refraining from eating it because it's mom. I'm eating it because I can't eat the non-kosher bird. So the word terefa is still extra. Right? Okay, fine. Ela terefa ba'ala that Yahya is really coming to exclude a halib of a kosher wild animal. So until now we assumed it was a domesticated animal. Now we're saying it's kosher wild animal, no tameh by halib. Something that you would have thought you would have thought that if only referring to an animal that the halib is asur, but meat mutar. Wild animal, wild undomesticated animal, the the meat and the halib is mutar. Therefore, the Torah tells you that the word terefa says that the wild animals too are included. Where it says, why is it different than a non-kosher animal, which you said its halib is not different from the meat? That's the case in a wild animal, an undomesticated animal. Also should be no different. Also now the pasuk says, you should not eat it. Sounds like even the halib of a kosher wild animal is tameh. Really, the word terefa is teaching you for the pasuk itself that the halib of a terefa without shechita is tahor. So why you need it? Shalot Tumar, because you would have thought to say, Ho'il utma'a asura me'achayim u'terefa asura me'achayim, since non-kosher animals are asur while they're alive, and a terefa also is asur while it's alive. Therefore, you should think, you would have thought, ma tme'a halba tme'a af terefa halba tme'a. Just in the case of a non-kosher animal, the halib is tameh. So too, the terefa of the halib also tameh. The halib terefa also tameh. Therefore, so terefa to teach you only the halib of terefa without shechita as tahor. Once the yachi hai nami b'ayda, but we also need that to teach you shalom tamari, because you would have thought, but ilva off tameh asur b'achila terefa asur b'achila, since a non-kosher animal bird is asur for eating, and the terefa also is asur for eating. Ma'of tameh eno metameh af terefa eno tameh, just like a non-kosher bird is not tameh, so too a terefa bird is not no tameh by eating it. So the word terefa is teaching you over there that the dead terefa bird, a kosher one, is tameh by eating it, just like any nevela. Where it says, oh, another knockout, mi'ika l'milef terefa metamah. How can you really learn the halacha of terefa from a kosher animal from the non-kosher animal? Tameh lo hayta l'shat kosher. Non-kosher animals are never kosher. Terefat haytan l'shat kosher. Terefat, before it was injured, was kosher. V'chitima terefat, maybe they might be already wondering, oh, but not necessarily until you have a animal that was, when it was born, or it was when it was conceived, it was always a terefa. So therefore, is always a sore like a nevela. We don't say that. The minamia ika, regardless, we go according to the general animals that they're not born with defects. So terefa and non-kosher are completely different. Rava says, Torah says, nevela terefa. Why? Yavo isur nevela. The isur of nevela will come. V'yahul asur halal, and it will take effect on the top of the isur of halal. Yavo isur terefa, and the isur of terefa will come. V'yahul isur halal also take effect on top of halal. Utzrichi, why need both nevela and terefa? The yashmeina nevela is only mentioned nevela mishum dema temeya, because it has tumah. About terefa and melobim, regarding terefa, there is no tumah. Therefore, it would not pile on top of halal. V'yashmein terefa only terefa mishum de isur bahim, because it's asur even while it's alive. But nevela is literally only when it's dead. Tzrichi, therefore, to not mention both nevela and terefa to tell you they're both asur on top of echel.